You're listening to the Raw Honeys podcast, the place to be real, be love, and be friend. Join Chelsea Fine, Heather Hildenbrand, and me, Amanda Axel. We're real friends who aren't afraid to talk about the raw truth of real life. If you're looking for a group of girlfriends who will support and encourage you when the going gets tough, this is the place to be. Pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and enjoy the show.
Hey honeys, thank you for tuning into today's show. This is Chelsea Fine and I'm here with Heather Hildenbrand and Amanda Axel, and today we want to talk about listening. Specifically, what does it mean to listen? In a culture where it's hard enough to be heard even when we're yelling at the top of our lungs, how can we quiet ourselves enough to listen, like truly listen to others? One of the biggest pitfalls in communication, particularly in American society, is that oftentimes we're not actually being heard by one another. Many times we're just waiting impatiently for the other person to finish speaking so we can contribute input of our own, you know? This isn't necessarily because we're trying to be selfish. It's more about a desperate need of ours as human beings, as Americans, to be good and truly heard. But what does it mean to be heard? And is there a difference between listening and hearing? These are just a few questions we want to tackle today on the show, so let's get right into it. I'm going to start with Amanda. Okay, Amanda, tell us, what is so special about listening? Why is it so important to us to feel heard? What do you think?
So I think there's a lot of reasons, and a lot of them I don't even know what the answers are for those. But I think, just like you were just saying, I think the biggest thing is that there's so much noise, especially now in our society, that we're really struggling to have our voice heard, you know? And so I think that it's really important not just to be able to share, you know, what we want to express and have someone else hear us, but also to be able to listen and really hear someone else, because we have no idea what kind of inspiration or genius or insight or wisdom or, you know, a million different things that can come out. But it's interesting, you know, because even though we're, like you said, is there a difference between listening and hearing? So, you know, I remember watching this episode of Happy Endings. Do you guys watch that show?
Yeah, I love that show.
There was this scene where the husband, Brad, had trained himself to repeat what his wife says, even though he's not really listening. And I think that, especially in marriages and other relationships, like maybe with your kids or something, we get really good at hearing things or, you know, repeating words and understanding the language.
Autopilot.
Right, but not really comprehending what the message actually is. And so I do think that's something we've trained ourselves to do because there is so much going on. Like, we have enough noise in our head to keep us busy without listening to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, we could pretty much just be fine with all the chatter and thoughts in our own minds, let alone what anyone else has to say.
Right.
But it's so valuable because we do have this ability to communicate with words. You know, we have an ability to communicate, you know, with written words. So I think that, you know, if we have this ability, it must be for a very significant reason, not just for the things we can think about that, you know, okay, yes, for practical purposes, it's great that we can communicate, but there's probably something even deeper there.
For sure. For sure. What do you think, Heather? Like, why do we so much want to be heard? Why is it so important to us?
I really think that being heard is really just the second half of human communication. I mean, we think of communication as speaking, like saying words and getting our message across. And really, none of that is even going to have an impact unless the person hears it. You know, unless somebody else receives it.
Yeah, exactly.
So talking is only one half of it, even though I think a lot of times we treat the talking as the communication, you know, in itself. And it's just not, and it's easy to forget that, like Amanda said, there's noise everywhere. And I think maybe it can get hard to hear the real message. I do think that I mean, there's a huge difference for me between listening and hearing. Listening is like there's a quote that I've heard, and I wish I knew who said it, that, we either we're listening to hear or we're listening to respond. Like, are you just, when someone's talking to you, and the heavier the conversation, the more likely it is, the more defensive we get. And so we're just waiting for them to stop talking so that we can talk. We're not really hearing what they're saying. We just want to say our piece too. So then it goes back to like, we are just looking at communication as talking and not listening. But listening is when change happens. Change doesn't happen when someone's talking. Change happens when someone's hearing it, when they're listening and they take it in a way that changes the story that we already have, that we're already telling ourselves. For me, I know when I've tuned out and I've stopped listening to somebody, it's because I've decided that the story in my head about them or about the situation is, well, that's just going to be true for me. Like, nothing they are going to say is going to change my mind about that. So this is my true story. And so you just tune them out. And we do it on purpose, but I think a lot of times, especially these days in our society, we're really not even doing it on purpose. We really are we're just tuned out, maybe from all the noise, who knows, but we are just tuned out, and we're just tuned into the story in our heads. And like Amanda said, that's enough chatter to fill, all the silence, really. And so I think listening is important because change doesn't happen otherwise. And I think listening is harder than people give it credit for, because it requires turning off the voice in our minds that's telling us whether our story is the only right one or not.
Absolutely. It is. Hard is a good word. It's difficult. And sometimes I have to ask myself, okay, why is it so difficult? Especially once I am acknowledging that I myself have trouble listening to others sometimes. I'll be actively in a conversation and they'll be talking to me, and I'll be doing that thing where I'm like, okay, when they're done talking, I'm going to say this. And then I'll immediately have a follow-up thought that's like, oh, wait, no, you should listen to them because it's important. And then that thought is followed up with, oh, but it's really hard to listen to them right now because I have something to say.
Yeah.
It's just like this. It's just this tumbling crazy, even when you try to be aware of it, it's still difficult to do. And, I find that a lot of times the reason I'm so desperate to be heard or want to have that thing to say to them is because I want to feel valid or accepted, or just all the things that they want when they're talking to me, and it's just interesting because as a society, we all want the same things, but we're not always so good at giving them to one another. Right. And there's just something about being in conversation with someone who is actively listening to you that kind of makes me feel purposeful or something. I don't know, I matter.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels so important. It's so important. But then that brings up another question, which is, okay, so let's talk about what's the difference between hearing and listening. Like you said earlier, okay, let's talk about that, because we use those two words in language. We tend to interchange them often, but there's probably some distinction, right? Or no? What do you guys think?
Sorry, Chelsea, what did you say? I was making a joke.
Oh,
I was like, how did she not hear that?
I didn't hear your joke.
Oh, man. Sorry, bad joke.
Sorry. That's a good joke, though. I wish I would have got it because that was clever.
I was like, I'm going to pretend I'm not listening. I'm so cute.
Oh, my gosh.
You are so cute. I'm just a nerd.
No, Heather was like, wait, what?
I was like, how did she not hear?
Okay.
Oh, I get it.
Okay, all right. My bad. I'm in a silly mood today, you guys. So
I know.
I love your silly mood.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what is the difference between
What's
hearing?
the difference? Is there a difference? Yeah, if there's a difference. Is there a difference between listening and hearing? And if so, what is that difference?
Absolutely. It's like my example, and I don't know why all these comedic movies and shows are coming to my mind in this conversation. But absolutely there's a difference between hearing and listening, just like I was saying, it's one thing to hear words and it's another thing to listen. And here's the other thing is, I think that something that is very rare among people is being able to listen between the lines. Because it's one thing to even hear words and comprehend them in the way that they're being said, with the emotion that they're being said, but to read between the lines of like, what are they really trying to say? What is really happening on the inside? You know, and I call that listening to people's hearts, hearing people's hearts. I think that's so rare. And so I think that's what real listening is. To me, that's what real deep listening is being able to listen between the lines. So that's a totally different thing than, you know, my husband saying, hey, did you get the mail today? And I say, yes, I did get the mail today. You know what I mean? It's like, or whatever. We need to buy the blah, 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 or whatever it is, you know. Then for someone to come at me with some kind of issue or sincerity, you know, or anger or whatever it is, and be able to like see, okay, well, what's really happening beyond the surface here, beyond the words.
Yeah, definitely. That, I mean, it's a skill. It's a skill that needs to be practiced, you know?
Absolutely.
What about you?
Well, I mean, right. I mean, I totally agree. It is a skill, and but it's an extra thing. It's like an extra step of listening that we are not.
For advanced listeners.
It is for advanced listeners. I mean, we're not programmed to do that. And that's why we wanted to do this episode in the first place, because we wanted to talk about the difference between just hearing somebody's verbal cues or verbal communication and actually taking in their message. Because what if their message threatens your truth or goes against your morals or paints you in the wrong? Or, you know, I mean, like, what if it does something that you're not, when you're in your own story, in your own head, isn't going to sit well with you? Are you still going to hear it? And we're programmed really not to. I think, I don't know, we feel threatened by it, or, you know, we let it throw us off a lot. And I know for me, it's because we take it personally. So if somebody's saying something I don't like, I tend to automatically, my gut reaction is to shut down that advanced listening technique.
It's a defense mechanism.
It's a defense mechanism so that I don't get my feelings hurt or whatever. But that's all because that now I'm in my own head about the story that's right for me. But I think this is really why we even wanted to talk about this, is because really what it comes down to, the difference between listening and hearing is like, it's like when you're really hearing them, you're trying to understand, you're in their shoes. You're putting yourself in their shoes, and you're really actually trying to understand where they're coming from. And you realize when you do that, like magic happens, because your ego goes right out the door. It doesn't matter. Your story is not important. And you realize that none of that is about you anyway. It's about them and how they're filtering the world through their own lens. Like when people get mad at you, or when people insult you, or when people say mean things about you, none of that is, you know, really about you. It's just about them and their view of the world. And I think it's the same with what we're talking about here, because again, the talking is only half of the communication. What you really hear in those moments is the other half. And I do think we can choose our level of understanding and what we're hearing. Like, we can choose to just hear the surface. And if that's, you know, going deeper is too much and we shut down, or we get defensive, or we're too busy, or we're not paying real attention, or we're too caught up in our own heads, then that's where it ends. But I think when we can stay open and like do the extra work, because it takes a lot more energy to hear on the level we're talking about.
Yes.
Like sometimes I just think about doing it and I get tired. And it's like when people talk about they're introverted or they don't want to be around people because it's tiring or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's why, because having to listen to their heart the whole damn time is really freaking exhausting. And I just sometimes can't do it.
Yeah, it's hard work. It's hard work. And it's uncomfortable work. Or at least, you know, I find for me, it's uncomfortable work oftentimes because, you know, quieting yourself enough to put yourself in someone else's shoes, it requires you to swallow your pride, your ego, like what you were saying. And that hurts. That's hard to do. It's hard to do because we spend so much of our lives just trying to protect all of that. And then, trying to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, you know, it forces us to feel outside of ourselves, you know, which is awesome and perfect and beautiful, but, you know, not exactly super pleasant all the time. Yeah. So draining or exhausted. Yeah. But man, always worth it, right? Like it's always worth it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I learned so much. I learned so much when I actively choose to listen. I learned a lot about myself, a lot about everybody involved in the conversation. And maybe for me, that's like another difference that I kind of see between listening and hearing is maybe more about like the audio or receiving that input, being able to repeat it or, speak on conversational, autopilot. But listening, is more about comprehension. It's more about understanding. And I guess understanding is what leads us to compassion and all those things. So they have like different tools a little bit, listening and hearing, and they need each other to be most effective,
Yeah, well, because I will argue and say too that like sometimes just surface listening is better for us. I don't necessarily think, because there are times, like here's the exhausting part. Step one is not hear their heart. Step one is decide whether it's smart to even try to hear their heart. Because the flip side of this, I think we're talking about when we are faced with somebody who we actually believe, maybe loves us or cares about us or like has sort of our best interest at heart, even if they're mad at us or we're clashing or we're too busy to pay attention, but we know we should or whatever. Like to me, those are the scenarios we were just talking about. But like the flip side is, especially these days, like, yes, there's a lot of people that are talking without listening and that are just want to spew their opinion. And when it does come to like, you can tell they are never going to listen with their heart either. And they're like, I am careful about what I let in, like if some stranger on the internet is posting racist, hateful comments, like, am I going to go listen to their heart right now? Probably the fuck not. Like your step one is, how am I going to filter this? Am I going to filter this through, let's listen closer, or they can go find another audience? That's for me, step one, because it really does depend on who it is and where I met them and how I'm hearing this message. And you can tell pretty quickly, even online, whether somebody is as open as you to that heart hearing scenario. And sometimes it is better to just protect yourself and move on. So I do feel like sometimes surface listening serves us. I do that enough. I do that just as often as I don't. And I don't want people to think that we're saying, which I know we aren't, but I think it's important for us to point out, we're not saying listen to everyone's heart, even if they're trying to stab you in it.
Oh my gosh.
Like there are some mean people on the internet. Okay. That's what I'm getting at.
I think that is a super fair argument. And I definitely agree that we have to discern what we let in and what we don't. Absolutely. And I think that's what, we all have conversations about the way that we experience the world. And I think the way we experience the world because of our views is very different than the way our neighbor who literally lives next door to us experiences the world and so forth. But it was funny that you brought up that specific example about racism because it made me think about this documentary I watched on Netflix, which I recommend to everybody, called, it's called Accidental Courtesy. That's what it's called. And it's about this African-American man who decides to have dialogue with members of the KKK. And as a result of repeated dialogue, he actually has helped some of these members of the KKK return their robes and quit, right? And what really stood out to me about this documentary, what was the most powerful thing is, as I'm listening to the interviews about how they were men mostly, but I think they're all men, about how these men came to join this particular group, it's not because they were born racist. Okay, nobody is born racist. So let's start with that. But it was because if you really listen to what they're saying, they felt disempowered in their life. And so this group gave them the opportunity to become empowered and to have status and to be heard, because they were not really necessarily trying to spread a message of hatred or racism. They just wanted to feel like that they were acknowledged or seen, and this was their avenue in which to do that. And that's why I think that it is very powerful too if we listen to people that it's funny, actually, my astrologer told me this. He told me, he said, have conversations with people that you don't agree with. He very specifically told me that, which is really interesting because I don't really argue with people I have like whatever they say, like I'm very easily convinced. So I'm like, that's a good point. Yeah, all right, I see it.
So what he meant was it's going to be some big things that you would never change your mind about if he's saying you'll disagree with them.
Yeah.
Right. And there's been so many things that I have changed my mind about because of listening or because of being open to the other side of that argument. So anyway, my point in saying all that is I think that there can be benefit in even listening to people that we have already deemed not worthy of our ears. You know what I mean?
I agree with you. I actually think that what we're saying right here is like a lost art, especially in this current political climate. People just want to like rant and say their opinion, but then they close the door on listening, on hearing someone else's opinion. And even like, I think they're threatened by the fact that maybe their mind would change. Like that scares them or something, maybe. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Usually fear is at the base of those types of reactions. Everything. I feel like, yeah, everything. Fear is the base of everything. It is.
Yeah.
And it's at the base of our political climate. I know that. And so I think there's a lot of that happening. And anytime we can get into a conversation where we can conduct ourselves with love and openness and open-mindedness and understanding, even when the other person can't, then I am totally for that. I think for me, there are times when I know I can't do that. So I don't enter into it to begin with. Because I think the mistake that people make is trying to enter into it. And they have the best of intentions of like, I'm going to be really respectful and polite and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to jump into this thread where all this drama's going on Facebook, you know, and it's like, oh, honey, you're so cute. It's not going to work out because then they lose their cool and like say something they, you know, people delete later or something, you know, it's like, for me, it's always measuring what am I capable of right now? And if I'm not capable of that, then I'm not going to enter into it because I don't want to add to that problem that I think is so prevalent right now, especially on social media.
Well, totally. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Discernment is key for everything in life, no matter what anybody says. Discernment is it's a big part of figuring out who we are and being proud of who we are. So definitely. And it's so interesting though, like talking about this because, you know, as you guys are talking, I'm just sort of laughing to myself because my approach to listening has kind of developed into a very tangible talk therapy kind of thing. In like a you know, on the side of my life, I do these one-on-one talk therapy sessions with people that I call listening ceremonies. And where basically I bring people into I have a special room in my house. I bring them into a room in my house and we sit on the floor and I just listen to them for as long as they need to be heard about whatever they need to express. And that is kind of a wild thing for me, only because I don't know anyone else who's like, yeah, I think I want to do this deliberately with people. But it was something that sort of happened organically with both of you, actually. It kind of developed over time with us and some of our friends. And it kind of grew so naturally and so fluidly that I fully accepted like this, oh, okay, I'm going to make a point to become a good listener because I love having these one-on-one sessions with people. And it's just been really interesting because there have been times when I've been like, oh, I don't know if this is someone I really want to go somewhere deep with right now, or I don't know if I'm capable of it. And there have been times when I've had to say no. But there are other times when I've had to ask myself, okay, what are my real fears here? Like, what is it I'm really hesitant about? And I guess really what I'm saying is that I have learned really so much just about myself and like how much discipline it actually takes me and my personality to sit still and quiet and to receive something in like a controlled way, like you were just saying before, because jumping into like a crazy thread online, it's so easy to spin out. And I think that that's maybe one of the pitfalls about the listening skill as we're learning it and stuff is that it takes practice and you're not going to do a fantastic, perfect job every time, all the time. It's like an ongoing venture, learning to listen or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's important because of exactly what we're talking about, the being heard or the not being heard. Like with the KKK members who they just wanted to be a part of something where they felt, valid or heard. And they found that their place there in that a little club of KKK people, because that's what happens when we don't feel heard, right? Or maybe I should ask, what does happen when we don't feel heard? Like, how does that turn around on us? Like, what are the effects of not feeling heard?
The word that comes to mind for me is resentment. And I
was going to say that. Yes.
Okay. So I really haven't thought this through. So Heather, if you want to elaborate.
Because, I have had time to think this through. Yes, go on.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
I know you're going to say it better than me. So
it's true. That's what it will lead to. I mean, there are ways you can catch it ahead of time, but I think without intervention in like a big way, when you start to feel not heard, especially in an ongoing way in an important relationship, resentment builds like quick, and then it's a lot harder to break through. It's a snowball because like you're not heard, you're talking without the other half, the hearing part happening on the other end. And then resentment builds, and the more resentment builds, the less you even want to talk, until soon you're not even talking because nobody's listening. And so the communication just breaks down, I think, worse and worse over time. I mean, that's for like big, important relationships in our lives, but even on a smaller scale, like if you're not being heard at work, like with your coworkers or your boss or, then you start to feel like you don't matter, and you start to feel, replaceable, or, well, it doesn't matter if I'm here or not. And that can make you feel bad about yourself, but it also can really, really breed resentment for sure. I know that like with my family, I feel like they are listening to what I'm saying, but it doesn't match the story in their minds of what they believe is right and wrong in the world. And so I'm not really being heard. Therefore, I'm not really being understood. And like we were just talking about earlier, because we were talking about personality tests earlier before we started recording. Yeah. And one of like my main things apparently in my personality, and I really thought this was because of circumstances. I thought that I was somebody who struggles with being understood because of how I grew up and being like misunderstood. Like I was blaming it on circumstances of my life. But then I took this personality test recently, and it was like, no, your main personality trait is that you feel misunderstood by the whole world. Awesome. So it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I think it's very interesting, too, that my personality type would be that I really have a deep-seated desire to be heard and understood. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to start a podcast that contains all of my innermost opinions and thoughts, and like I get to talk, right? I get to talk to the whole world, and y'all bitches have to listen.
Oh, but it feels so good, doesn't it? It feels so good.
Yeah.
Everybody better be listening right now.
I feel like,
are you tuning us?
I feel like if they're a rebel like me, they're like, oh, she said I have to listen. I'm turning this shit off. I'll come back next week. Like, I just killed half of them. Yeah, they're gone. Oh my God. I don't blame them. That was so bossy. I don't even blame you guys. Just turn it off and then just turn it back on. It's fine.
I love your rebel personality, Heather, because I am so not a rebel. Like, so it's so fun.
I know. I love it. You guys are like opposites. It's so cute.
In that way, we are.
We are. We totally are. But I'm a big enough rebel that I need people to pull me back. So that's what you do. That's why I'm married to like he's a free spirit, but he is kind of a rule follower. Like, he doesn't mind the rules. He's like, why would we need to break them? They seem fine to me. And that's good because it pulls me back, But there is something, for me, I know because it's my personality, there's something huge and freeing and like being understood. And so, but there was something really scary that we have talked about a few times about starting this podcast, where if people hear us and don't agree with us or don't understand, what's that going to, not if, when that happens, how is that going to feel for us? you know?
So that's like the other side of listening. It's the giving to listeners. Oh gosh, that's such a good point, because it's kind of, it's personal, it's vulnerable, and it's risky.
It's risky. It's risky because then they're going to post all those hateful things I was talking about, and then we have to decide whether we're going to read them. And guess what? Spoiler, I'm not.
Because you practice discernment.
That's right. And I know myself. And listen, if I wanted someone to tell me about myself, I would just go visit my sister.
And this, folks, is exactly why people need to listen.
I don't need perfect strangers telling me about myself, okay? I'm not going to read it.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about what listening looks like, the to-dos and the not to-dos of listening, because there have to be some nuances in there, that some tips or tricks of the trade. You know, how can we be a good listener, or how are we bad listeners? Like, what are the things we do?
Well, I think you kind of covered some of those earlier. We were talking about how you're just waiting to, I think it was Heather's quote about just waiting to speak, you know? So I think everybody is guilty of that. If you're not guilty about that, I want you to write into us and then tell us how you do that, okay? Because that's amazing.
And then we'll do an episode on lying, because we don't believe
Yes,
you.
we will. And we'll read it out loud.
Oh my God, I would
We'll
love
read
to
it
do an
out
episode on lying. Oh my God, that was like my college thesis right there. But anyway, yeah, so I definitely that. And I think just not being present, and we're very guilty about this in our society, is that we can literally be in a conversation, having coffee with someone, looking at I have looked at people in their eyes and not heard a word that they are saying.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, but why? What was the breakdown? I'm curious.
It's probably not because they weren't saying anything interesting to me. It's probably because I was more preoccupied with what I have going on, or an idea I had, or something maybe. Usually when I'm doing that, it's not because I have something to say. It's because I'm like, oh, wait, this makes me think of something else. And like my mind just goes away, you know?
Rabbit trail.
Yeah. But I had a kind of a similar experience to what Chelsea was talking about earlier, because I also, do some work where I have dialogue with young women and support them and encourage them. And I remember, one time I was with someone and I had another person with me. We were doing the same thing. And later she'd said, can I give you some feedback? And I was like, oh shit, what is she going to say? And I was like, yeah, of course, just like, I want to know, I want to be better at what I'm doing. And she said, you were talking a lot, and that, these visits are really more about asking these kind of open-ended questions so that you can know what's more so going on in their life. And I know for me personally, I do not like silence. Okay. And my husband is probably one of the quietest people I know. And I hate it when he's just in the kitchen and he's just totally quiet, because I'm like, no, we have to fill the space with chatter. Like, why are you being quiet? Are you mad at me? Like my brain just goes,
mad at me?
Do you want me to leave the kitchen so you can be alone? Like, why are you not talking to me? Like, cause I love to talk. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because I love to talk. So she said that to me, and I was like, oh man. At first I berated myself, like, oh man, I did it wrong. Like, who knows how long I've been doing it wrong, But I was so grateful that she said that to me, because after that point, I had to actively listen. I had to watch myself. Am I talking too much? Am I waiting to talk? Am I really hearing this person? Am I really asking them the kind of questions to get them to open up to me? All these kinds of things. So
I feel like I learned something in your little story too that we didn't say yet. And that is, you were really, really willing to take constructive criticism. And so you really heard that in that moment that you received it. And I think maybe we're better listeners. The more willing we are to and open we are to taking constructive criticism, the better listeners we are.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like the more
absolutely.
willing to admit that we're not right all the time about everything, the more open we are.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
And that's so hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, because being wrong threatens our whole inner story. It threatens our us,
Yeah, our sense of self.
That brings up another point, because sometimes you can hear and you can really try to understand, but you're not really in the place to hear it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I've had things in my life that have been told to me over and over again. Heather used to say one thing to me all the time about book marketing, and I was like, I know what you're saying, but I don't, and I'm trying to understand what that is, but I didn't really understand it until I was really in a place that I could receive that message. You know, I really couldn't have pushed it along any faster, unfortunately for me.
But we're here now.
But honestly, it wasn't for lack of trying. I'm like, yes, you keep saying that, but I don't really understand what that means. I want to, but I was just too dumb to figure it out at that time.
No, your confidence level, I think, in yourself made it harder for you to receive it. And I only say that because I was there with business, with marketing. I was there with learning the next step, with learning, I wanted to learn how to run Facebook ads. And that sounds like such a little thing, but I didn't do it for years because I was frustrated because I tried it a few times and it didn't work. And then I started telling myself that I was just too stupid to understand it. And telling myself that made it true. And all the information that I got that made it click for me finally to where I was like, oh yeah, duh, it just works like this. Boom, boom, boom. Now I'm making positive ROI. It wasn't any new information. It was all the same and wasn't even as much of the information as I had been getting everywhere I went looking for it in the years before that. But it just clicked because I made a decision. And I was like, this year I am going to learn Facebook ads. I am not that stupid. I mean, I know how to turn a computer off and on. I know how to type a book on it, and I know how to upload it, and I know how to get paid. I know how to do all these things. Yeah. I am not stupid enough. I can't figure this out. And I just decided, you're doing it. You have a whole year. Get it together. Pep talk to myself.
Make this happen.
So I do think it's a decision we make, and maybe it's the same with the constructive criticism. We just decide we're going to be open. But I mean, we're all pretty good at being open to changing our minds. And I think it is harder for some people to do that.
And that brings up another really good question. Let's talk about listening to ourselves, because when you're talking about making decisions, when we're talking about taking constructive criticism, it all comes down to how we're listening to ourselves or how we're not listening to ourselves. I don't know if you guys agree, but sometimes I think I would say it's harder for me to listen to myself than it is to listen to other people sometimes.
I actually think we listen to ourselves too much because I think that everyone's default voice by the time they grow up, just because of the world and the way it is not nice, right? We are mean to the way we talk to ourselves.
I mean, okay, yes. Okay, yes. Okay, so
yeah, and so then we accept that.
Intuition, right? But there's two different parts of listening to ourselves. So yeah, that's a good. Okay, let's talk about that first, but then we can come back to intuition.
Yeah, because because one drowns out the other. I feel like.
Yeah, right. They're like good and evil.
Yeah, the good angel and the bad angel on your shoulder. Yeah, they are, and unfortunately, by the time we get to be an adult or 20s, whatever, we're out in the world or whatever, I just think our inner voice in our head is really, we're just not nice to ourselves. Me telling myself I was too stupid, and Amanda just deciding she couldn't get it or whatever. And I just think maybe we should listen less to that. We should listen less to ourselves. Yeah. I mean, because even when I try, or when I have done things to reprogram, because it's so ingrained in you by then it's in your subconscious. So even if consciously throughout the day you're all right, I'm going to say affirmations and talk to myself nicer and tell myself I'm smart and I can do this and whatever, that takes a million times more work to override the negative thought already in there because it's in your subconscious. And so we have to listen to that more and listen to that subconscious voice less, I feel because it's just so mean.
Right. So we have these two voices just kind of ongoing running in the background. But for me personally, the peanut gallery that's all negative and morose and rude and mean is way louder than the nice voice.
They sound different, right? Like they sound different. They feel different in your body. And I don't know if I'm getting too woo-woo when I'm saying that.
No, it's a physical feeling. You are right.
Go for it, because it's a real,
Yeah. Or at least that's my experience of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and like when you listen to the hungry voice, like the kind of loud one that's just constant, when you listen to that, sometimes it feels a little reckless, and sometimes you immediately regret decisions and stuff like that. But for me, whenever I listen to like the quieter, more gentle voice, that's far more rational. I always feel really good about listening to that voice. In retrospect, I'm always like, oh, that was a good decision. I should do that more often. But then it's the same thing every time. Those two opposing forces inside. Yeah. But it's so important, like intuition or that inner voice, that inner consciousness. I mean, I like to believe that is the truth of like us as individuals. What that is truly who we are, how we are, what we are, right? And the difficulty in not just finding that voice, but listening to it and following through with what it maybe is directing you. It's just kind of it's an ongoing battle, right? Would you guys agree? It's just like you have to practice it.
Everything you're saying is an ongoing battle. I think that, we all, obviously the three of us have negative self-talk that perpetuates itself consistently. Sometimes it's quieter, sometimes it's louder. And the more and more I learned about really successful people that we deem don't have this negative self-talk because they're so successful. If you listen to any of their conversations, they battle it every single day. So absolutely, that is a battle every day. And I think as far as listening to your intuition, this is something I struggled with a lot. Some people are better at listening to that little voice, the little good voice inside of them than others. I know, like Marie Forleo talks about, her mother really helped her cultivate that trust in herself. And so as a little girl, she was listening to it. Whereas like I didn't have that same experience. And so I ended up in a position where my intuition would try to talk to me, but I just shut it out because I didn't trust it. And sometimes I couldn't tell the difference between my negative self-talk and my intuition. And so I would listen to my negative self-talk and it would lead me astray, or I would hear my intuition, but I'm like, I don't know, that sounds a little unreasonable. So I wouldn't follow it. And then I don't know, then I have no trust. I have no trust in myself because those voices, they were sounding the same way. And so I actively had to pay attention to what was really being communicated inside of me, which makes me sound like a crazy person. But also, like, how was I feeling physically? What were the results of listening versus not listening and the kind of listening? And it's something I still have to practice it because I'm not great at it. I'm not as great at it as I think both of you are, but now I can feel the difference, and I could catch the negative self-talk faster, and I can feel the strength of my intuition quicker too. Yeah. But it takes practice for sure.
Absolutely. It takes practice. Yeah. I think that thing we're calling intuition, that second voice, that's the same voice that's the same part of ourselves that is capable of the deep listening and even wants to, because that's the part that connects us. So actually, I think you're better at it than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah, man.
Because you are a deep listener, man. You're like an advanced level listener.
Thank you, guys.
You really are.
See, now this would have been a better time to make the joke. Wait, what did you say?
We probably would have gotten it now, too. I feel more awake in this conversation than I did when you did it.
My comedic timing is off. It's okay.
We'll just get it edited. We'll get it edited out of where you said it earlier, and then we'll just put it in right here. And it won't be awkward. It will feel real natural.
That sounds perfect. Let's do
that. Super organic. Yeah.
Super organic. Yeah, I really think that is the same part of ourselves. The part of us that wants to be heard is our ego. And the part that wants to listen knows that that's really where we'll connect. Because we really just want to be heard so we can connect. So we can feel like we're connected to somebody, right? But I think the real connection does come in the listening, because I think about the relationships I have in my life and the friendships I have, and like especially with you guys. And I really, really feel like our level of listening is advanced, before we really even open our mouths, we know the other person is going to understand. And that if they don't reflexively understand, they're going to sit with us until they do. Mm-hmm. And not many relationships can say that. And so it's not about the talking. I mean, clearly it's about the talking. We're doing a podcast and we're loving it, but it's not about the talking. It's about that interconnection that comes from like knowing that we're understood by somebody. That's like a trust. That's such a kind of, yeah, it builds a trust of someone. Mm-hmm. Now I know I can go to you for anything, no matter how it sounds, because you're going to hear what I really mean. And like, it's safe.
It's safe. But it's something, like you just said, it's something that you build. And I'm thinking about the three of us right now, because our friendship, we as a trio really we're very proud of ourselves when we can grow as friends, right? Like we really like learning about how to be better listeners with one another and how to communicate best with one another. And it is about practice, and it is about building, because you can only build anything one brick at a time. It's just been really beautiful for me in our friendship with the three of us to like watch us lose our tempers or watch us lose our emotions or let our egos kind of get out of control, and then have the other two kind of help pull us back into a place where, where we're more proud of how we're responding and behaving, but at the same time, everybody's giving and learning and receiving something that's benefiting the entire relationship, and it's just, I don't know, if you can get relationships in your life where you can do that kind of thing all the time when stuff comes up, like care enough about the other person and care enough about how you're listening to them to like really see instant, beautiful results, like live time in conversation. I don't know, it's just super rewarding. I'm so grateful for you guys. So
well, and then we're able to have more bandwidth to do it for the places in our lives where it's not as welcoming and easy.
Sure. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And thank goodness.
Yeah.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. Well, as we're wrapping up, what's like one thing you guys want to leave with each of our listeners today about listening?
Well, I think you guys might know what I'm going to say, which is I would really encourage everyone to try to listen to people's hearts more. It's not going to be a perfect thing. It's going to be a struggle at first. But I think once we really start to cultivate that skill, we can see through everything. And because of that, we're able to really see the true aspect of life all the time. And that's so important because of all this ego talk that, we've been discussing this whole time, that it's very easy to just get bogged down in our own place, our own life state, whatever it is. So I would really encourage people to, just kind of experiment and see what they can really hear when they do that. And just know that, when we have the courage to silence our own ego and listen to someone else, we build trust with that person. And when you build trust with that person, barriers begin to fall one after the other. And that's how you create a really deep relationship. I think that's how the three of us have created such a deep relationship, because it didn't happen instantly. It happened slowly over time, some quicker than others, but that is how you cultivate a really deep relationship. So that's what I would leave everyone with.
I would say that if you are looking around your life at your relationships and your friendships, and you feel like you're in a place where you're mostly not being heard, that is dangerous, because it does affect it affects us, I think, more than we give it credit for. And it is a shame, and it's prevalent. It's like a lost art, I feel like, is listening to understand. And I think one thing I am taking away personally from our conversation that I probably wouldn't have been able to articulate when we started is that if you want to be heard, you first have to listen. And so that's what I'm taking, because that's, looking back, that's how it worked for us. That's how It's worked in my marriage. That's how it works with my kids, all my most important relationships. And Amanda is like cheering silently and doing like all these Rocky moves. I just want you guys to know. And she's pretty fucking excited that I just said that. So somebody needs to write it down because I already forgot. I already forgot, as I do.
It was beautiful.
That's mine.
If you want to be heard, you have to listen.
Boom.
Yes.
Damn, that was good.
And I think I would maybe add on to that as you are first beginning to listen, maybe practice on yourself before you practice so much all the time on others. Practice listening to that more quiet, soft voice that usually 100% of the time points us in the right direction. Practice trusting yourself inside and gaining that confidence to kind of be silent and trust yourself in listening when you're in relationships and conversations with others. Because everything starts inside, right? Everything starts right here at home. So yeah. You guys, this has been a beautiful conversation. I love this. And I love that we get to share all of this with all of you honeys out there. Thank you so much for listening.
We'll see you guys next time.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Raw Honeys podcast. If so, please share it with a friend or post a review. Heather, Chelsea, and I would love to connect with you. Check us out on Instagram at the Raw Honeys or join our community of honeys on Facebook. Thanks for listening. We wish you nothing but big love.